20 years that we've been in Afghanistan, there's only 13 living Medal of Honor recipients from the 20-year war in Afghanistan. There's 2, I believe, from Iraq. So it's an extremely rare medal. And with me right now is Clint Romesha wearing that medal. Clint, how you doing today, man?
Doing good.
We've done this a few times.
We have.
We've done podcasts.
We have.
We've done
ice fishing.
Ice fishing. Yeah, I did a couple weeks ago. Clint and I were ice fishing in South Dakota. I watched you kill 10 beers before 9 a.m. It was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in my life.
It was 10:30.
Yeah. Did they give beers out, or did they give medals out for that?
If they did, stuff? I don't know. I've got buddies that'll drink me under the table with that. But, I mean, we were ice fishing, Jack.
Okay.
I mean, that's like regular fishing.
It's been a long time since I've been in ice house. I was losing my Minnesota cred big time on that one. But I got to ask you, you're not from North Dakota originally.
No.
You grew up in BF, California. How does a centrally placed young man end up in the Army from your background? And please tell us a little bit about your background.
So I grew up in Northern California, which, when I describe Northern California, I grew up right on the Oregon-Nevada border, like as far north and east as you can be in that state. So when I say northern, I consider anything south of like Chico, California, Southern California. Those that say they're from Sacramento area, part of NorCal, I don't really count that. But I grew up in this town called Lake City, and it was a town of literally 100 people. My great-grandma was the postmaster there. Her and Grandpa ran a little convenience store, part of the post office. My family had settled there from the days of the covered wagon coming across the U.S. on the Oregon Trail, and that's where they kind of just settled in at. But growing up in this small little town, I went to school in a town of like 500 people, where I still to this day can brag about 2 things. One is I graduated in the top 15 of my class out of the 14 kids that were there. And 2, I can brag to my English teacher, who gave me a 12% in my senior English class, that I would amount to nothing, to now it's like, hey, Miss Gregory, guess who's a New York Times bestseller? You suck.
We're definitely going to be getting into that. So how did you end up in the Army? Is that something that came natural to you? You knew you were going to do that for years? Was that you got in trouble with the law? What's the story with that?
Well, you always got in trouble in my little hometown because nothing you could do, everybody knew before you even got home. No, I grew up with this sense, my dad was a Vietnam veteran. He was an infantryman, did 2 tours in Vietnam. Granddad was a combat engineer in World War II. He survived Normandy Beach, the Battle of the Bulge. I had uncles that had served. I mean, came from a very, well-defined military family. My oldest brother, he served in the Army, got out. He's still in the Air Force now, so I can still pick on him. That even though he's a chief master sergeant or whatever, he's still got to salute me now. So that's a little brother payback action that I just can't get over.
Is he saluting you all the time, or just when you're rocking the medal?
Just when I'm rocking the medal.
Okay, so do you put that on at like Thanksgiving dinner to flex, or how does that work?
Well, he does one better because he always keeps pulling these overseas assignments for the last 8 years.
Yeah.
Going from Alaska to Hawaii to Korea.
He's ducking you.
Oh, he's ducking me. me and his 2 ex-wives, I'm sure. My second oldest brother, he ended up joining the Marine Corps. So when it came time for me to graduate high school and stuff, I always had this sense that I wanted to serve. And it wasn't because my dad did or my brothers did or my granddad did. It was just growing up with those stories of them talking of that camaraderie with their brothers and stuff overseas and being in combat and just that experience of something more than yourself that you can be a part of. And for me, that was just amazing to listen to, because I never remembered Dad or Grandpa ever talking about the horrors of combat or anything like that, or their glory days of combat, or however you want to describe that. They were always talking about those guys that, they met, that they still keep in touch with 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, and those connections they made. Like I said, I was a product of C's get degrees, so I knew me in college were not going to be a thing. Like I said, growing up in this small town, we had a ranch, so I grew up milking cows and digging fence posts, and I knew that's something I did not want to do for the rest of my life. So for me, joining the military was partially wanting to just go back and serve and do something more than just exist, and then part of it was I was tired of milking cows and digging fence posts. Get a little life experience and go see what happens. So I joined in 1999. I graduated high school. said I wanted to go right away. So I tried to sign up as soon as I graduated, and I graduated at 17 years old. Like I said, not because I was overly smart or like a Doogie Howser or any of that. It's just because my birthday was in August. So when I graduated, I was still 17. And I remember going up to my dad and asking my dad, I'm like, hey, I've talked to the recruiter. Hey, we've got all the paperwork drawn up. I'm going to join as a armored crewman. First duty station will be Germany.
An armored crewman, meaning you were a tanker.
Tanker, yeah.
So you didn't want to milk cows and do any heavy lifting on a farm, so you became a tanker.
Because that drives you places.
Okay, gotcha.
Pros and cons. little bit of work for a little bit of comfort. And of course, my dad told me never to go infantry because, that's just stupid. So of course, I'm like, I'll go armor. And then of course, he countered that with, he's like, well, that's even dumber because now you're the biggest target on the battlefield. You're easier to see. But when I asked him, hey, I'm 17, will you sign off on me going? Dad very much just kind of looked at me and said, hey, look, it's 1999. There's not a lot going on in the world. Just need you to know that maybe not tomorrow and maybe not even in 20 years of service. But if you go and put on that uniform, you'll have to go and do and see things that no man should ever have to go and do and see. In my mind, I'm the youngest boy of three. Second youngest of 5 total kids, but 2 older brothers. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, Dad wants to hold me around for the summer to get one more summer of free labor out of me. And he wouldn't sign for me. So I was kind of upset. So the day after I turned 18, joined, went to basic training out of Fort Knox, Kentucky, and then all of a sudden found myself in Vilseck, Germany, where get to my first duty station there and find myself in Kosovo.
And that's the thing is, everybody, obviously, they know you from the book Red Platoon. They know you from numerous interviews and films. But the fact is, you had already spent 10 years in the Army before October 9th, 2009. You had done 2 deployments to Kosovo, 2 deployments to Iraq previously to that. So tell us a little bit about your 10 years of experience in the Army as a tanker and what led you to becoming eventually a Cav Scout.
So like I said, I joined right away because I wanted to go out and I wanted to see the world. And like I said, it was 1999. We were at relative peace. We were doing some stuff in the Balkans with, Bosnia and Kosovo and Milosevic. So like I said, I joined, get stationed in Germany. My unit was already deployed. So 2 weeks after boots on the ground at my first duty station, I find myself in Kosovo. My mind, and I think, a lot of the guys that I was serving with back then, because September 11th hadn't happened yet, a lot of us were joining for, like I said, college money and life experience. So that's what initially got me in the door. And it was one of those things that I think a lot of us looking back, you end up joining for one thing, but you end up serving for another. And I just remember being over one in Kosovo and thinking to myself, holy crap, I used to complain about being this little poor country boy growing up in the middle of nowhere, complaining that the nearest McDonald's was a 45-minute drive. And now all of a sudden I'm in this third world country where we're escorting Albanians through Serbian towns and Serbians through Albanian towns, escorting them to get fuel for their tractors so they can farm, because if they didn't have an escort going through the opposite town, they would get killed. And it really put in perspective what I took for granted as a kid that grew up in this great country, that just gift of freedom that was just bestowed on me because I was here. And like I said, initially I was going to do my 4-year enlistment, kind of check the block, grow up a little bit, see the world, and then I'd figure out what I was doing with the rest of my life. Well, of course, we fast forward. The military I loved right off the bat. It was very challenging for me. The camaraderie, though, that really drove it home for me.
Did you recognize early on what your dad had told you before you enlisted, that this was kind of going to be the, for lack of a better word, hook? This was going to be what keeps you around and dedicated to people?
What actually, the situation I got in where the military really stuck with me, and what I really understood what Grandpa and Dad were talking about when they talked about that camaraderie, that brotherhood, people having your back no matter what, was when I was stationed in Germany. It was 2002, and I grew up in California. I'm 5'5". I can't shoot a 3-pointer. So me and basketball don't really go along for sports. We're too small to have a football team. So I played soccer growing up. So in 2002, the U.S. was playing Germany in the World Cup. And we're in this little bar in Nuremberg called the Green Goose, drinking some beers. The World Cup's going on. We're playing. I'm the only American in there. I got 4 of my other Army buddies in there with me. I just made my E5. I'm watching this game. We end up losing. A couple of nice German guys come over and give me their condolences for the U.S. losing the World Cup or losing a chance to go at the World Cup. And of course, I got to retaliate and said, well, we might not win World Cups, but we'll win some World Wars. And a bar fight ensued. And
they're a little sensitive about that one.
I think they in hindsight,
Yeah.
sometimes I should think a lot more than speak. And my buddies, like I said, were off playing pool and doing their own thing, but I knew right away, I've got these 2 guys that are jumping me and we're getting in this fight. My 4 buddies come over right away. Huge frickin' brawl ensues. MPs show up, or not the MP, the Polizei shows up, beats the crap out of us. We get locked up, pulled to the jail. And of course, I'm the senior guy. We have the status of forces agreement with being in a foreign country. So you get your phone call back to your unit. I'm the senior guy. I got to call staff duty because the rules were if you had your first sergeant show up, they'd pick you up from the German police and they could take you back. And well, I make that phone call and my first sergeant says, hey, well, it's by that point, Saturday morning, first work call formation is 6:30 PT Monday. That's when I go back to work. That's when I'll see you. So we set the weekend in jail, just thinking, I just made my E5, got in this bar fight, drunk and disorderly. I'm losing all my rank. I just brought my buddies into this thing because of my smart mouth and my dumb comments. They're going to get in trouble too. Well, long story short, we get picked up Monday, takes us back to the unit. I go in to see our commander. I'll never forget, Captain Thomas, who's a Texas A&M boy. He's sitting there and he's got the Article 15 already sitting on his desk to bust me down. And he asked me what happens and I tell him. I said, yeah, give him a quick synopsis. He said, well, what'd you learn? And I said, well, I think I learned that we need to get out of there before the Polizei show up because most of these bruises are from them, not from the German guys we were fighting. And he just looks at me and he says, hey, the best thing we can do is make mistakes because mistakes is where we learn stuff. As long as we don't make them again. And he took that paperwork and he threw it in the trash. And he let me walk out of that office with my stripes on. And like I said, that notion that I had those 4 guys, my 4 buddies, have my back in a fight that they didn't have to. They stuck their neck out for me, and I had a commander that had enough compassion to teach me a valuable lesson of making mistakes and learning from mistakes. So I never got caught again in a bar fight.
You never got caught?
Caught again, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, and I would imagine, again, this happened long before you were involved with one of the biggest battles in American history. That had already set a precedent at that point of what you can expect from your comrades, and also sounds like you got a few scratches, huh?
Yeah.
Before the Taliban ever got you, the German police did?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Fair enough. And you did 2 deployments to Iraq as well.
Yes. So my first deployment to Iraq was 2004 to 5. I was actually stationed out of
pretty light years, right?
They were.
And not a lot going on in 2004, 2005 Iraq.
There's that take back of Fallujah that we had to go do.
Oh, that one, right? Okay, carry on. Sorry.
So I was stationed in Korea, and we were the first unit to get alerted from a deployed unit to go to another one. So I found myself in 15 months in Korea after I re-enlisted. We get orders to go from Korea to Iraq on the first deployment, where we find ourselves in a place called Habaniya, which is right in between Ramadi and Fallujah. That's the time that we went back into Fallujah, recaptured that city. And that was really when my dad was telling me, that's when it sunk in. You just, like I said, you never forget kind of that first time in combat when you finally know what the difference between getting shot at is and getting shot at is. And that's one of those things that I could never put into words. But there's a distinct sound that oh man, that was close. And then there's a distinct sound of, oh, that guy just barely jerked that trigger and pulled that shot a little wide right. And, seeing the first time, one of your battle buddies gets hit and goes down, that's when it clicked to what my dad was talking to me about, of going and doing and seeing things that no man should ever have to go do and see. And then coming back from that deployment, that was the first time my dad ever opened up about his experiences in Vietnam. It's that unspoken thing between kind of combat veterans that it's very hard to talk about that and describe to someone, because a lot of times it's not about what you're actually saying. It's about those pauses, those moments, that body language of when you just kind of abruptly stop part of your story and take that breath. And it was just, Dad's always teaching me things. Like I said, I remember the first conversations we had after that deployment, and he just said, well, how do you feel about what you went through? I just said, it was really kind of shitty, but it was also super amazing to be there with those men next to me and know I wasn't there alone. And he just looked at me and he said, that's the greatest thing he carried out of his military service, that he never did it alone.
Do you think he already knew the answer to that when he asked you that?
Oh yeah, he's super, super smart.
Yeah. You do 2 deployments to Iraq. You're already a seasoned combat veteran at this point. And obviously, you went from being a tanker, and you've been doing this for almost a decade at this point, to completely changing your MOS. You become a Cav Scout. That's more of a boots on the ground kind of career field. Now you're going to all new terrain in Afghanistan. What was that little transition like?
So that transition was more one of those being voluntold to do something statuses. Like I said, initially I came in on tanks. I could also partially see the writing on the wall that as we continue to go overseas, this big armor battle was becoming less and less. So a lot more of it was going to be on the ground, more of the light fight, not tanks versus tanks. But it was also at the same time where General Senzeki was saying, look, we're downsizing the armor branch. We're getting these new striker vehicles, so we need more Cav Scouts. Since 19 Kilos and 19 Deltas are both in the same branch of armor, it's really easy to say, hey, Staff Sergeant, hey, I know you've been doing the tank things for the last 6 years, but now we're going to change your K into a D, and you're going to come over to the Cav Scout site, which, like I said, coming in as one thing and getting that transition to something else, can be frustrating at times. But for me, I looked at it as, I enjoyed going to combat, and I mean that in the aspect that I love being over there with the guys. That team, that camaraderie, that brotherhood. And when you go back over and now you're no longer a crew of 4, now you're, a whole platoon of 18 men, builds that brotherhood even tighter in that team. So that's how we found ourselves going to Afghanistan, is making that transition, that shift, and all of a sudden realizing, there's a reason the Russians learned their lesson back in the 80s that you don't put tanks over in the mountains. So it was good to get that training and that transition over to kind of get those skill sets, in my back pocket going there.
Going into the Battle of Keating, this was the early part of your deployment. You guys were in a real Alamo situation. You were surrounded by 300 Taliban, all with the high ground. There were 79 of you there. At the end of the battle, they estimated about half the Taliban were killed. Almost half of the American forces were either killed or wounded. We can go down a brief synopsis of that, but really tell us in that kind of moment. Obviously, you had been in the Army for 10 points. You are a combat seasoned veteran like that. You're leading a lot of guys who are also combat veterans. Perhaps they've been to Afghanistan before. You're leading a lot of guys that this is their first time in the fight. If you could just give us a brief rundown, and again, I wish we could cover this thing, but we would be talking for days about it. I guess it's just better to be written in a book called Red Platoon. Tell us a little bit about going into that battle, what kind of situation you guys were in, obviously the firefight itself, and the heroes of that day.
So going into Afghanistan and that whole situation, one of the critical things, I look back every day and I'm blown away by it. So we knew prior to going over there, we're going to this place called Combat Outpost Keating. We'd gotten the intel briefs, we'd gotten word from the unit we're replacing that this place is a shithole. It is literally a small, tiny little outpost that's maybe 150 meters wide by 100 meters in width, that's sitting literally all the way at the bottom of the valley, surrounded by mountains on all 4 sides. Sergeant Joshua Kirk, who just came to our unit, to our platoon, About 6 months before that deployment, he was with the 173rd, and he was operating in that same exact battle space on his previous deployment. So when Kurt came to our platoon, I mean, we also had that firsthand experience that came with him, that he's sitting there and he's like, hey, we've got to be able to PT because, you know, we're going to be running up and down these mountains that are 45-degree angles, if not steeper. We're going to be trying to chase guys with 60, 70 pounds of gear on that are running around in man jams, flip flops, and AKs. We need to make sure that all of our weapons training, we need to concentrate heavily on angle fire, because everything's going to be either straight up or straight down. We need to modify our weapons mounts so we can go 90 degrees. And everyone from the lieutenant down to the newest Joe, like they all knew this situation we were going in. That when we got there, we spent 3 months. We spent 3 months in combat Outpost Keating before the attack happened. And on average, you got attacked once a day. On average, you got 1 shower a week. On average, you got maybe 3 hot meals in a week. You got mail once every couple of weeks. The living conditions, a lot of times we didn't have power to run all the power to the facilities. So in the heat of the summer, you didn't have any air conditioning. You didn't have any lights in the barracks. That got diverted over to the Tactical Operations Center for the radios, the computers, stuff like that. And I mean, I remember I loved writing letters, and I remember I wrote a letter to my grandma, who was still alive at the time, when I first got over there, and it was just a simple letter that said, hey, Grandma, getting settled in, you know, morale's high, the guys are looking good. You know, I get to wake up every morning and look up at these beautiful mountains. They remind me of the Sierra Nevadas back home where I grew up, where, you know, we're from. Life is great. I'll let you know. Love you. And a couple of weeks later, Grandma Smith sends me a letter back, and it just starts off with, what the hell are you doing looking up? Everybody knows you take the high ground. Like my grandma knew in that one little phrase that the location was not ideal. But what really impressed me is, you know, soldiers bitch. Soldiers, Marines, sailors, we bitch about any and everything. But I cannot recall one time where, like, any one of our guys, whether it was their 3rd or 4th deployment or their very first one, they looked at it and they said, you know, there was this stupid phrase that was written up on a beam, kind of like this one up here in our barracks, that a unit there before wrote it, and it just said, it doesn't get better. And a lot of the, you know, the command group looked at it as this negative saying.
Right, because that's not like Notre Dame's fight like a champion thing. Yeah.
Our platoon and our guys, you know, Red Platoon, we took that saying and we looked at it and it's like, oh, shoot. Yep, we were supposed to get, you know, a mail run by the Chinooks today, but they ended up dropping the 15K bag into the river, and it floated down the river. So no care packages this week. You know what? Doesn't get any better.
Yeah.
You know why? Because life is good already. We didn't need that mail. We got each other. And it was so awesome to see. Like I said, that was my 3rd deployment. Seeing guys like Copus, seeing guys like Mace, you know, their first times overseas ever. And they didn't one time just say, oh, fuck this. This is too hard. This is too difficult. This is bullshit, man. No, they took it and they embraced the hell out of it. That every day was going to be the best day because we're going to make it that.
It was like your platoon's very own embrace the suck, but it belonged to you guys.
And so we get rolling in, and like I said, for 3 months, it was kind of this routine, and we're about to get out of there, and that's when October 3rd happens. Right and early 6 o'clock. Like I said, we normally would just call it our Taliban alarm clock, because normally around 6 a.m. every morning they're shooting at us. But that morning, the bullets come in, and it's like, oh, there goes the Taliban alarm clock. But as soon as you woke up, like I said, our platoon was on force protection. I had just gotten off Sergeant of the Guard a few hours before, so I was trying to catch up on sleep. And so I remember, waking up, and it was just like, shit, this isn't our normal wake-up call. This is something different. And then throughout the course of that day, it was just one of those situations where things were going from bad to worse, no matter which way you were trying to go and do things. But there's just some, just critical things I remember. You know, one major thing was when Hart came up to me, and this is after, the battle had been raging for hours. We'd lost communication with Gallegos, and about 5 guys stuck at a Humvee. Didn't know if they were quite alive or dead still yet. And when Hart came up and he's like, hey, I want to take this other Humvee and I want to push over and get them. I remember knowing no matter what I was going to tell Sergeant Hart, no was not an option. He was going to go do that. And so when I finally gave him the go-ahead to do it, I knew that was the last time I was ever going to see him. When you see kind of that commitment, that's a special thing. Seeing guys like Copus, he's this young kid. He was 19 years old at the time. Copus was one of these classic cases. No, he was 20 at the time. One of these classic cases, like he had just graduated high school, didn't have much going on in his life. He's smoking too much marijuana and working stupid oddball jobs. And Copus was one of these guys that joined the Army because he got too high and he thought he was going to PetSmart for a job, and it ended up showing up at a recruiter station and joined the Army.
I think all veterans in here can relate to that story right there. Yeah.
Yeah, he thought he was going to PetSmart and made a wrong turn at Albuquerque. And all of a sudden, he's the last gun left in the fight that day. And he's holding down the 1 Mark 19 position, holding the whole eastern side of the COP on block by himself. He could have gotten out of that turret, he could have ran, he could have done anything. No one would have thought less of him. But he sat there in that turret for 14, 15 hours straight, holding on to that position. Like I said, most of the time by himself. Thinking back to, going in there, and as things happen, our commander that was supposed to be there the night before, the aircraft he was on going up to O.P. Fritchie, where our second platoon was, got shot at, and he wasn't able to make it back. So my Lieutenant Andrew Bunderman from Minnesota, from Blaine.
Go Gophers.
He was a Gopher boy. Studied history, was his major. He was the on-the-scene commander that day. Brand new lieutenant, first deployment ever, and he's running that whole battle.
This is a lot of responsibility for a young man.
Yeah, that's 3 levels up, in your kind of chain of command, your structure, should go, the commander, if he's not there, then the XO, and then, one of the lieutenants. And all of a sudden, Bunderman's thrust into running this entire battle. And I'll never forget it because he's a lieutenant, and I'll never let him live it down. But there's one point I remember going into the talk, and there's Bundy with a book in front of his face, hand mic and at his ear, and he's got the book in his face. And of course I look at it and I'm like, "Hey, Lieutenant, what are you doing reading a book in this firefight?" Typical LT move. Gonna read a novel while bullets are flying. And he kind of looks up and I see what he's reading. He's reading the Army's Call for Fire manual, and he goes, "Hey, I'm about to start dropping 500 pounders less than 100 meters away from our position because of the steepness of the mountains and the congestion." He's like, "There's about a 90% chance we're going to drop on ourselves."
And this is a last resort situation.
Yeah,
This isn't something you do at the beginning of the battle.
This isn't like
plenty of ammo.
This isn't like a brand new butter bar making that oopsie mistake on a grid coordinates and dropping too close. This is an actual well thought out situation. And I just remember looking at him and I'm like, "Hey, sir, it's better our bombs than theirs." And he said, "All right, well, I'm going to do it." And because he knew the risk versus reward, that if he wouldn't have made decisions like that and started literally dropping 500 pounders 100 meters away from our wire, he knew that was the tactic of the enemy, to push in and get close, because Americans would typically not do that. Like I said, and that gutsy call, those just resilient and persistent things I got to see day in and day out, or time in, time again during that day, was just amazing. I remember, Larson was another one of my team leaders that we thought we'd lost. And I remember when he showed back up, the wind just kind of got put back in our sails. That was the point where we got him back, we'd got Mace back. The medics were doing their work on Mace, and then we could make that final push to go try and recover the rest of our casualties. And at the end of the day, we wrapped up. Yeah, we ended up losing eight men that day. You look at it too, and it's like it could have been a lot worse. Look at it again as years have gone by, and I think one of the critical things that really set us apart is, you look at the sheer numbers of it. You said there's 72 guys. Well, out of that 72, you're counting 30 of the Afghan National Army guys that were there. On first contact, 90% of them either threw weapons down and walked off and weren't helping. Out of the remaining 52, part of that is an entire headquarters element. I mean, every guy was pulling triggers that could. But you look at it, the enemy that had the high ground, that had done their work, there was no place you could be outside without being exposed to.
And these are experienced men. They've been doing this since you guys were in diapers. They were doing this against the Russians.
They were doing this against Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got some history in fighting, and they are very good at it. But they've got the high ground. They've got the fire superiority. I mean, we were getting hit with sniper fire, small arms fire, recoilless rockets, RPGs, mortars, Dushka fire, and I mean, just raining down. And they estimated it was about 400 fighters against 52. And like I said, yeah, we lost 8, and that's tragic. But how was it not more? I don't know. You know,
it's a testament of American resiliency, I would imagine.
What I kind of pin it to is, like I said, I don't remember ever being like scared that day of dying or getting blown up, or like that never phased you. That never crossed my mind. That fear. What scared the ever living shit out of me was what was happening to everybody else.
And you were the platoon sergeant.
Yeah,
these were your guys. They were your responsibility.
And I was stepping into that role. My actual platoon sergeant was home on leave that day. So I was stepping up for my section sergeant position to be the platoon sergeant that day. And I just remember, you know, I can look back now and I can tell you this, you know, the enemy had the guns, the enemy had the firepower, the enemy had the numbers. The enemy was fighting us because they hated us and they wanted us to die. We were fighting because we loved each other. And I'll tell you this right now, that love of your brother that you're fighting with, your left and your right, that's such a powerful thing that is, I mean, no bomb, no amount of firepower can defeat that. You want to know about love, you go to combat with someone, and you'll see love like you'll never see it anywhere else.
Like your dad did.
Yep.
And you didn't realize it at the time. There's no way you guys could have. You were at that time in one of the, both statistically and morally and in almost every facet, you were in one of the worst firefights of the entire 20 years we've been in Afghanistan. But you're still at the beginning of your deployment.
That's month 3 and a 12-month deployment.
So you take a high amount of casualties, and for those of you who just had a few scratches and could get back into the fight, you still have a lot of meat to get to for the next phase of this deployment. What was that like? I would imagine you guys got replacements, and you guys had to go back out and push.
So immediately after the battle, you know, just as the dust was just barely settling, you know, we were already leaving that outpost. I mean, the enemy, like I said, they were smart. Either way, we were leaving that place. So for them, it was going to be a victory. Whether we left on our own accord, whether they totally annihilated us, or whether we went through what we did, at the end of the day, we were still leaving. And like I said, we still had 9 more months left in country. And as we displaced out of there 3 days later, we blew everything that we could in place. Anything we could actually salvage and take back, we did. And we went back to where our higher headquarters was at Fob Bostic.
Did they give you a beer at that point?
No, we got new underwear though, because most of our stuff got
all right.
out.
I'm sure that felt somewhat nice.
And I got chocolate ice cream at the beef factory.
There you go. Yeah.
Ice cream in 3 months. I was pretty stoked. We come back to Fob Bostic. Like I said, out of that day, we lost a total of 8 guys. But just out of Red Platoon, we lost 4 of those 8. So, I mean, literally overnight, we lost 3 critical team leaders. And then Stephen Mace, one of our junior enlisted guys. But Stephen was that personality in the platoon, as a lower enlisted guy goes. Like, he was the heart and soul of the lower enlisted. So
he was a natural leader himself.
I wouldn't quite call him a natural leader.
Okay.
He was just one of those guys.
He was the platoon's jester?
He wasn't quite that. No, Copus was the platoon joker. Stefan was more like doesn't matter what was happening, he was going to make you laugh. No matter how shitty the situation was, how fucked it was, he always found the silver lining, and sometimes in the most inappropriate ways. But he's one of those guys you could always be around, and you knew life was going to be good. And so that's a
and you have to replace
thing.
a guy like that.
Yeah, you can't replace that. I mean, there's nothing that'll ever, replace a Stephen Mace or a Gallegos or a Kirk or a Hart. But we found ourselves back at Bostic, and we're sitting there. It's like, how do we keep going forward? We got 9 more months with these guys. We still got mission to do. Obviously, most of our equipment's destroyed, gone. We got to wait for that to come in. We got to wait for replacements to come in now. And I remember sitting there with Lieutenant Bunderman, and we're kind of discussing this. And I don't remember what we said to the guys, but I remember taking some of the senior lower enlisted and giving them kind of that speech of, look, we got Gallegos gone, we got Hart gone, and we got Kirk gone. I need 3 team leaders. And you guys don't have to be a Kirk, Gallegos, or a Hart, but I need you to step up and be that leader for the rest of the guys. So we had guys like Raz, Rasmussen steps up, and Larson steps up, and you have Kopis stepping up. And like I said, they'd never fully replace that loss, but they found their own way to be the same leaders that we had taken. And then we get these replacement guys in, and it was very critical that the one thing I never ever wanted our guys to ever say to one of our replacements is, you weren't here that day, you don't know what we've been through. It's like, no, these guys coming in, we got 9 months left with them, and we need that same group of guys, that same team that we lost to go through this 9 months with us. And I know life sucks right now, and this is a tough love experience, but I don't want to hear crap about that day until we get back in the States. Because if you're thinking about that day and how bad it was and how shitty it was, well, you're not thinking about what's going on right now. And if we're not thinking about for the next 9 months what we need to get done, we're not going to make it 9 months. And that was one of the most impressive things I've seen is I watched these 16 young men, young leaders, spend another 9 months in country, put their big boy pants on, still not quite bitching, complaining, griping, moaning, and we didn't have another loss. And knock on wood, it's...
Yeah, you had to go searching there for a moment, yeah. It's very nice modern decor in here.
That was back in 2009 or 2021, so it's been over 10 years ago. And to this day, Red Platoon has yet to lose a guy from suicide or take his own life.
You guys are still having each other's back to this day.
We've got this stupid platoon.
I've seen how you are with Larson in person, so I know you guys are going to have each other's back.
Yes. I mean, we've got this stupid platoon text that's going on that sometimes if you don't check it, there'll be 200 messages there. But we've got this brotherhood that when we know one of our guys, you're not hearing from them, it's time to really start reaching out to them. We've got situations where I know personally I've had Larson drive 9 hours to come up and see me. They're there. It's anytime, any place. If you need your brother, they're there. And I think we really built that. And I don't know how. I mean, I wish I could tell you the step-by-step kind of recipe of doing that, but it's something, just because we've all gotten out and went our separate ways, we've never lost that connection. And of course, there's some guys in the platoon, and I'll be honest, that are not as popular as other guys. But, we tell the guys, it's like, hey, you're like family. I ain't always going to like you, but I'm always going to love you. And you're always going to be family.
And like your actual blood brother, you don't let them duck you.
No.
That's good to hear. So you get through that deployment. You've been in the Army for 12 years at this point, and soon after that deployment, you decided to walk away. And that's one of those moments, like you either got to shit or get off the pot, I would imagine. 12 years, you either got to wrap it up while you're still relatively young or move on. And you did. You went into the oil field soon after that, just going from the insanity of not just what happened in Afghanistan, but 12 years of military life to now you're a safety inspector in the oil field. That's got to be quite the transition there.
That whole transition process, I'd made the decision I was going to get out of the Army before that deployment. It's a very combination of different things. I never wanted to be stationed in a TRADOC unit. I knew that my oldest daughter, at that point, I'd been gone for more than half her life. I knew that I initially enlisted for 4 years, and now I'm sitting here at 12. I mean, there was not one thing that made me, say, screw it, I'm getting out of the Army. I enjoyed almost every second of being in it. But I just knew for me that was my time to go, my time to make that transition. And of course, transitioning is never one of those easy things, because like I said, prior to my military service, I could milk cows and dig fence posts. So now doing 12 years of Army, having only really kind of that in my back pocket as a skill set, I didn't quite know what I was going to do getting out. So I started a few plans, and I was looking at some things with some more government jobs that kind of closely related, but those started falling through, and it just by happenstance that the oil fields in North Dakota was booming. My brother-in-law had been working the oil fields for years, been trying to convince me to get up there. He knew kind of my, mindset, my mentality, that I'm a hands-on guy. Doing something in the trades, the skills, stuff like that is what drives me better than going to college. So kind of on a whim, I realized that my first A, B, C, D plans were all out the window. So I went up North Dakota chasing oil fields.
And while you're up there in North Dakota, you're up there doing the oil field. You're in it. You're settled back in the civilian life. You've been doing it for a while. I'm sure it's pretty good money. And you get a phone call one day.
It's one of those things where when I got up there, like I was that typical veteran. Everything I did in the military, I put it in this little box. I threw it in the back shelf. That's where it's going to be. Here's my new chapter in life. So I'm up there for almost 2 years, and all of a sudden, my cell phone rings. And it's from a number I don't recognize, and that was really before they were calling you every 10 minutes for updating your auto insurance policy or whatever. And it's a number I don't recognize, but I'm like, hey, I'm a friendly guy sometimes, so let me answer this. And I pick up the phone, and on the other end of the line, there's this voice that goes, this is Colonel Davis, G1 from the Pentagon. Am I speaking with former Staff Sergeant Clint Romesha? Said, yep, this is me. And he goes something to the effect of, hey, we need you to come out to DC. We got something to tell you. And I said, well, sir, the great thing about cell phones is you can tell me over the phone. I don't have to go anywhere. And he goes, no, this is something we have to tell you in person. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh shit, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
Like it's
12
been
years
years.
is a long time to commit some war crimes you didn't realize you were committing.
I mean, statute of limitations should have been up by then. I was thinking, I'm like, why the hell is it? Why is
maybe
a
it was
colonel?
the German police. They wanted to finally get at you. Yeah.
So, I'm really bewildered at that point. I'm like, what the heck is this? Obviously, right after the battle, awards and stuff got talked about. And initially, my commander came up and said, I want to submit you for a Distinguished Service Cross. And I told my commander, like I told the guys, hey, we got 9 more months left in the country. You can do whatever you want, but I just want to get these guys in and out of here. So do what you have to. And I never really thought of it again. So when I get this phone call, that's kind of in the back of my mind. And I tell this colonel, I was like, hey, yeah, I'm up here in the oil fields working 6 to 7 days a week. I don't know when I can get time off to go back to DC. Let me talk to my boss. I'll get back to you. So one of the greatest things is making a colonel wait like 3 weeks to return his phone call. And I waited 3 weeks, and I talked to my boss, and I said, hey, I think this is about something I done in Afghanistan. I shouldn't be going to jail, but I do have to go back. And he's like, well, okay, you can take a weekend off. So I called Colonel Davis back up, and I said, yeah, if you guys get me in and out of DC, I can be there on a Saturday, but I need to be home on a Sunday. They said, all right, and they set it up. So I fly back to DC.
Into Reagan or Dulles?
That was Reagan at the time.
Okay,
yeah.
good, because Dulles is a piece of shit. I just want to take this point of the interview to really insult that airport. I hate that airport with everything in my heart. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but Dulles has smoking lounges still.
That's true.
I do like the smoking lounges in Dulles.
That we should do that during the Q&A, talk about which airport we all hate the most in this country. Sorry, go ahead, bro.
So I get off the plane, and of course, there's this colonel there that picks me up, and I go straight to the Pentagon. They take me in, and I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, I probably got, best it'll be a silver star or something. They're gonna do their little attention to orders things, hand me it, shake my hand. I'll be able to go back to the hotel bar and get drunk, and I can come back to North Dakota tomorrow. But they pull me in, and all of a sudden there's all these colonels and generals and bigwigs and stuff. Hey, congratulations, Clint. You know, all right, cool, whatever. And they bring me into this big conference room. Got a fucking PowerPoint presentation going on because the Army's never gonna not do anything without PowerPoint. And they set me down at the head of the table. Everybody's lined up around it. And as I go to sit down, there's 3 posters in front of me. And one's of Leroy Petrie, one's of Sal Junta, and one's of Sergeant Sabo, a Vietnam recipient that was awarded posthumously. And I remember just kind of looking at those as I sat down and just start staring at them. And I felt like Charlie Brown at school because they're talking and I'm not really hearing nothing they're saying. And I don't know if a couple of minutes went by or a half hour or what. I finally looked up and I'm like, hey, time out, guys. What's going on with all this Medal of Honor stuff in front of me? And one of the colonels or generals looks over and he's like, oh, you don't know Sir Romesha? And kind of looked back and I was like, well, if I knew the answer, I wouldn't fucking ask the question. I was like, no, I don't know. I got told I got put in for a DSC. So what is all this Medal of Honor stuff? And then they looked back over and they said, well, you've been recommended for upgrade. Short of the president signing your award, you'll be receiving the Medal of Honor. And I remember looking back and just going, for what? I was like, I didn't do anything. Like I don't think I did anything special that day. I just did my job. There's 8 guys that didn't make it home. Well, why are you guys doing this? And they said, well, you know, you'll be receiving it. So, and I just kind of put my head back down and just kind of shut them off and tried to process, and it just wasn't quite processing. And then right after that little meeting, I got to go meet the first recipient I ever met in my life, and that was General Foley. It's a retired 3-star Vietnam guy. And I got to sit there, talk to him for about an hour, hour and a half. And General Foley, you know, I asked him the same thing. I'm like, sir, why me? And he said, you know, that's something we all say. He's like, you know, I'm part of the review. At that time, he was still kind of part of the advisory review process. And he said, you know, we went back and we looked at it. You know, he's like, we knew just by the narrative right away that this should have been more than a DSC. He's like, and we went back and we talked to your guys and they all agreed. And he's like, this was what your guys thought you deserved. And to me, that really put it in perspective that if those men that I was there with that day believed that I deserved it, well, you know, it doesn't really make it any easier to wear it, I'll be honest. You know, I got selected to wear it, but it means more than just one person. This is not just for the 8 men that died that day, it's for all of those that have put this uniform on. For those great men and women that, I mean, over 20 years, we're still fighting the global war of terrorism. We still got, you know, my oldest daughter turning, well, shoot, she'll be 20 this year. You know, all she's known is this war of terrorism her entire life. And you still got those men and women that come from that demographic that are still raising that right hand and serving. And it represents that. It's more than just me. It's every one of us.
And for the guys that you shared October 3rd, 2009 with, many of them were there for the ceremony at the White House. So was that kind of the first reunion you guys had? Was them watching you receive that medal? And did anything change? Were they still razzing you like they were before? Like, is there still
they
that?
Still
like,
razz me now.
Yeah, they want to keep you humbled, right?
That was, I mean, we'd all kind of stayed in touch, even making the transition out. So, I mean, we were always generally in touch. You know, more I'd got to see, you know, there had been guys that I hadn't seen since 2010. When we got to the ceremony, I just remember, I remember being up on stage and I just remember I did not want to be there. But I remember looking out and in the front row was my family. And right behind them was the 8 Gold Star families. And just to the left of that was the guys I served with that day. And I just thought to myself, man, this really fucking sucks being up here, but I'm glad I'm not alone. I've got my family, my military family, my Gold Star family all sharing this with us. And that was just an amazing experience that it really sucked that it took something like that to get us all under one roof. And I do say things like roof and woof. I do know I mispronounced certain things.
Yeah, it's very North Dakota. You really acclimated well to the upper Midwest.
But it was amazing to sit there with every one of them and share it together